for September. Everybody settled good? Right, so let's start with the apologies for absence.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Felstead, Bob Felstead, and Councillor David Nuns is substituting, and also got apologies from Councillor John Lawson.
Okay, thank you. Any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests? No, none were declared. There's no reason to exclude the press or public from any part of the agenda today. The minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of August, are we happy to approve those? Yep, good. Right, so coming from that, on page 7, we've got the recommendations for consideration. So, as a result of us approving the scrutiny call-in, we decided that we would make some recommendations on top of that about trying to improve the governance and processes for WICA as a whole. So we then came up, where have they gone? It's in the premium. So in the right. So you'll need to go back to the pre-meeting pack in order to get them. So these were on page 5 of the pre-meeting pack, where we've got the conclusions report, Scrutiny Committee, 22nd of August 2025. So we've got the conclusions that we reached, and we've then got some recommendations. Now, Khaled, in the pre-meeting we discussed some of those at a high level, but before we go into great detail, can you just, what ones are we changing?
It suggests that recommendation 3 is changed to include a specific 6-month timeline. Wording in recommendation 6 is changed from laymen to lay people, and recommendation 10 is changed to put more emphasis on the political accountability element, ensuring political accountability of lead members overseeing policy development.
Right, you want to read out what that amendment is for the public who are listening in? Sorry?
What page are we on?
We're on page 7 of the pre-meeting.
The full wording that was discussed was ensure political accountability of lead members overseeing policy development within their portfolio, leading debate and answering at the combined authority and engaging directly with scrutiny, relevant committees and the public. To ensure political accountability of lead members overseeing policy development within their portfolio, leading debate and answering at the combined authority and engaging directly with scrutiny, relevant committees and the public.
Okay, right, so are we now, anybody got any other comments they would like to make about the recommendations? Anybody would like to make? Yeah, Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you, Chair. Not in reference to the recommendations, but could I just remind people, and if I'm wrong, please do correct me, that we're not just a scrutiny committee, we are an overview and scrutiny committee. And everything in the reports should head overview and scrutiny, because that gives us the opportunity, through whatever means our process is available, to actually have time and consideration for items either going to the forward plan that need an overview in terms of what, if any, issues need to be scrutinised from there on, Chair.
We should use our full title, not the abridged version, that we all know what we are, but it's a perfectly valid point. Anybody get anything else they'd like to raise? Councillor Merritt.
Yes, I just wanted to reinforce the amendment to recommendation 3, which was for a minimum 6 months. And the reason we're saying that is if we're going to do pre-scrutiny, which I think we all recognise is perhaps one of the most important functions that we do, we need to see when items are coming up long enough for us to say, right, we need to have a look at that, organise the meetings, produce appropriate recommendations to feed into the process. So that 6 months is crucial. If you look at the forward plan on this agenda, we've got 1 month at the moment. We wouldn't even be able to get a meeting before the decision had been made. with that.
Right, so, yes,
Yes, just echoing the points that Betty and Dave made, it will seem to me to be a change in strategy and for the better, I feel, if we're seen as a body that looks at policy development and changes before they're changed or introduced, rather than being seen as commenting after in a post hoc way. And I think that change of emphasis will help on both sides and certainly make the organisation more democratic. But it does need a change of emphasis from where we are, I think, for the better.
yeah. Well, there is no doubt that there's a lot of expertise around this table and we can definitely add value, and that's why most of us are here, is to add value so that WICA at the end of the day becomes a better organisation, makes better decisions, both for our benefit but mostly for the public's benefit as well. So they understand. So yes, I would totally endorse that. So anybody got any other comments? So in that case then, the recommendation was that we've tabled them for consideration, we've made comments, we've publicly advised of the amendments that we're putting to it. So presumably everyone is happy, no one is wanting to vote against. Nope, good, we're approved on that one. So we then go on to item 6, the devolution and integrated settlement update. Right, before we do that, there is one new member of Scrutiny who maybe Sarah and Joe haven't come across before. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Councillor Hannah Bithell and I am on Leeds City Council. I represent Kirkstall and I'm chair of the Infrastructure Investment and Inclusive Growth Scrutiny Board.
So, okay. So Sarah, can you just briefly introduce who you are so that Councillor Bithell knows who you are, and then if you just give us a brief outline as to what's in this paper, and then we'll go into questions.
Welcome. I'm Sarah Eaton. I'm Director of Strategy. It's a short and abridged version of the title. It used to be Strategy, Communications and Intelligence, so got a range of functions within the organisation that we're responsible for, but obviously here today to talk to you about devolution and the integrated settlement. So I'll kick off, shall I? So I'm taking the colleagues have obviously read the paper, but I just thought it might be useful to give a quick run through and where I can I'll update as some work is already starting, particularly around the integrated settlement. So we've previously come to the committee and talked about both level 4 devolution, and I think we've been and spoken to you about work around the kind of the devolution act and the white paper. And I think obviously when the bill landed in July, that you can see kind of how some of that policy intention is kind of outlined in the bill. But there's also some new things in the bill that perhaps weren't originally in the white paper. So useful probably just to kind of touch on that as we come through. So I think when the white paper landed, there was a clear intention on the part of the government and actually the previous government around both deepening and widening devolution across the country. And I think that in part kind of signals to some of the things that are coming out in the bill. Some of this is around, I think, trying to make sure that there is a consistency of approach across the country, and that what you're not getting, which is currently the position where individual areas kind of negotiate their kind of devolution deal, which has been the kind of the practice in the past. But you're making it much consistent and more easy for areas if they choose to kind of take up that kind of devolution. So what it's doing is it's creating more of a framework really, rather than kind of having that one-off deal making, which I think is quite important in terms of making sure some of the things that I'll talk about in a minute are in place really. And what it does is it creates that kind of new tier of kind of regional government in England, which is called strategic authorities. And they've kind of got that responsibility for strategy development and programme delivery over that kind of larger functional economic area. And I think to recognise the fact that we've got lots of different kind of sizes and different shapes of strategic authorities coming forward and new ones in the pipeline. There are 3 levels of strategic authority, which is set out in the paper. And West Yorkshire falls under the kind of established mayoral category, and as a result of that, has access to kind of more powers and responsibilities than the other areas. So what that has given us, kind of moving forward, is that access to an integrated settlement, which is clearly something that colleagues will be well aware we've been kind of pushing for, particularly when the Trailblazers were kind of announced over previous years. I think one of the new bits in the bill that wasn't kind of set out in the white paper as well is around kind of clearly defining the 7 areas of competence for combined authorities, which is set out in the paper. And what that's kind of doing is kind of saying these are the functional areas that we think strategic authorities should be focused on moving forward. And that then translates into the devolution framework, which is set out in the paper. So the devolution framework is something that you'll have seen previously through kind of level 4 devolution, where there was a range of activity that kind of areas could kind of sign up to. And that kind of says these are the things that we expect strategic authorities, combined authorities to kind of be responsible for. Not everything that potentially we will have access to or be involved in is set out in that framework. So, for example, we'll have access to kind of non-statutory offers, because the bill is around kind of statutory areas of work, but there'll be other kind of partnership and funding arrangements that were set out in the white paper. So, for example, there'll be other legislation coming through around rail that might give access to greater partnership enhancements that will come through in that legislation, not through this particular bill. The bill will enable mayors to appoint up to 7 commissioners to potentially lead on each of those areas of competence, and able to kind of determine their portfolio of work and where appropriate delegating relevant functions are. But that is not mandatory, and that is up to each individual area to decide whether or not they want to kind of use that kind of opportunity if they so wish to do so. But there's some clear powers that come through in the bill, particularly around the general power of competence, and that's kind of an existing broad power which will now apply to mayoral strategic authorities, and that currently applies in kind of local authorities, which can be applied across those 7 areas of competence. There's also in there a power to convene and a duty to respond, and that kind of allows mayors to kind of call on local partners to come together to address local challenges, and makes local partners have that ability to kind of respond, and so that's talking in some respects to the convening power that was kind of referenced in the white paper. And then also there is in there a duty to collaborate, and that will allow mayors to kind of call upon mayors in neighbouring areas, strategic areas, through a formal process, so they can kind of enter into collaboration. We can always see, I think we've taken a report to the CA recently where we were talking about some of that partnership activity that's taking place, because we know that some of the work that we do does not, and pleased to see Councillor Merritt here, but some of the work that we do is not just defined just by the boundaries that are on a map, and we do work cross boundaries, so that ability to work across the place is kind of incredibly important. And obviously one of the things in the bill is the ability to ask for additional powers. So the government consistently say that this is the floor, not the ceiling. There's a greater ambition around powers and functions that might come to strategic authorities. But one of the ways in which they will facilitate that is through a right to request, and that will enable established mayoral strategic authorities via their mayors to kind of ask for further devolved powers from government. So there is some work taking place and some guidance taking place within government at the moment about what that might look like and how that would work in practice, because I think obviously through other mechanisms we have asked previously through kind of the spending review and other kind of mechanisms for greater access to funding and powers, and we will continue to do that, but the right to request is a mechanism that is officially we could call upon to do that. And there are some other statutory functions in there which are in the paper. So, for example, the ability, the need now to produce a spatial development strategy, just transfer of fire and rescue functions, and that public safety competence. And obviously that is something that we'll need to think about when we kind of implement change once the bill has received royal assent. There are lots of other things in the bill, but this paper's concentrating on things that I think are around impacting greatly on the strategic authority. But there are aspects in there about local government structure and accountability. So there's new measures in there about around audit and local government, making sure that accountability is in place. And I think I referred to that earlier about that consistency of approach across strategic authorities, and being able to hold strategic authorities to account is something that is referenced in the bill. And obviously there are things in there that impact on local government more around things like the cabinet model. There's also things in there around the community. So this was something that wasn't in the white paper, about that community empowerment aspect, which is creating that new community right to buy. So there are things in there that we will see flow through once that bill is kind of making its legislative path through Parliament. There was a second reading on the 2nd of September, and there's an intention, I think, for it to become law in spring, summer 2026. That's quite important because there's lots of new strategic authorities coming through, and they will need this legislation to enable them to kind of elect a mayor kind of next year. So we're continuing to do quite a lot of work around understanding what the devolution bill will mean for us. We did quite a lot of work on level 4, and we're using that as the basis for some of this work to take us forward. But some of the key activity we've done is kind of try and develop a work programme so that we're getting ready for some of this work. And so, for example, we're doing quite a lot of work around thinking what governance might look like. At the minute, I know you've had conversations about governance, but that is something that we will be thinking about as we move forward to make sure that we're ready for some of the bill when it kind of lands. Not all of it will come at the same time. So, for example, on the spatial development strategy, we've already started that work. We've already started talking to partners about what that might mean so that we're ready over quite a long process to kind of do that work. So some things we know more about, some things we've got less detail on at the minute, and obviously our work programme needs to take account of the fact that this isn't all going to land in one point in time. Some of it is coming forward as we kind of speak. So in terms of the integrated settlement, was initially piloted through 2 trailblazers in Greater Manchester and West Midlands, and it's been extended now to cover 7 areas. So the established areas and the GLA as well have been pulled into scope. There was a memorandum of understanding that those 2 trailblazers kind of signed up to, and that kind of governed the way the trailblazers would work. And that has been updated now through a policy document. So if you are interested, there is more detail out there around what the government is expecting from areas that receive an integrated settlement, and the principles of how they will work is set out in there. But what we will get through an integrated settlement is kind of funding through kind of 7 themes, through 6 themes, sorry. So they don't completely align with the themes that are set out in the 7 areas of competence, but what we expect to get is some funding which will be attached to those kind of 6 areas, and we'll also be required to develop an outcomes framework, and that outcomes framework will set out key high-level outcomes, kind of measures that we will need to kind of deliver against, and funding that will be attached to those kind of measures. So what it does do, I think unlike previous funding streams, it gives us flexibility within those themes to kind of really think about how we want to use that funding moving forward. So there's a greater degree of flexibility, and when we've talked to kind of the 2 trailblazer areas, what they're saying effectively is that what's allowed them to kind of what's been of most use through their experience to date has been that ability to kind of look within the themes about how they use their funding, rather than have kind of simple funding pots that they have to be kind of delivering against. It gives us a little bit more flexibility in that space. So the paper sets out some of the key work streams that we're delivering against, and a bit of a timetable in there, Councillor Anderson, just so that you can see kind of where we're at. One of the things we have to do to be ready, I guess, for the integrated settlement is go through a readiness check, and external consultants are appointed through the government to kind of work with us over this next period of time. So that work is about to start. We've just had an initial meeting, and that will kick off from September onwards, and we'll have a piece of work to do between now and December to show that we're ready and able to kind of be receptive to to taking on the integrated settlement. We've done some initial work within the organisation. The criteria are changing, so we will need to take on board what that new framework looks like as we move forward into this next period. I think the other notable thing to kind of perhaps keep our eyes on is when the government publishes the kind of the formal quantum for the integrated settlement, and we were expecting that in autumn. We know how long autumn can be sometimes, don't we? But the initial indications is that that's going to be between mid and end of the October, which means that we will have a big piece of work to do around kind of that, how we translate what we're doing at the minute on the work on the outcomes framework and aligning that with the quantum that is coming forward. So I think I'll pause there, but I think just to say that obviously we know that this is a big piece of work for yourselves as a scrutiny committee, and what we'd be hoping to do when we have talked to colleagues in the team around when your working group's going to be taking place, so that we can kind of align some of the work that we're doing and things that will be coming forward to your working group date, so that we can bring things forward. We're expecting that there'll be quite a lot to do within this next quarter and the following quarter, and obviously we'll be hoping to work with yourselves through that period as some of that work starts to progress. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Right. So if you can use paragraph 318 as your basis for any questions that you're asking. So in other words, there's a work stream mentioned there. So if you can mention which work stream you're covering, I'll start to go through them from top to bottom, but knowing how sometimes we end up going into varieties of space. So let's start with the first one. Anybody got any questions about implementing the required governance and accountability changes? Councillor?
Thank you. It says about the readiness check in the risk area of the report, point 4, that it's unlikely that we wouldn't be able to address it to the government's satisfaction, but doesn't specify where we are in terms of our readiness checks. Just in case I've misunderstood, we're now checking our own readiness. They're going to come in and check that we've checked properly, and then give us some things that we might have missed, which we have to work on. Is that correct?
We'll do a joint exercise between September and December, which we'll do that. We've done some initial
Sarah, can you use your microphone? Sorry.
We've done some initial self-assessment against the criteria that the two trailblazers used. The criteria that is coming forward in this next period will be a revised set of criteria. There's been a new consultant appointed to do that piece of work. There are three areas that each individual kind of established mayoral authority will be judged against, whether they're core, whether they're kind of in the middle, or whether they're kind of excelling. And it's not there to kind of trip up areas. It's there to kind of say, well, if we want to go even further with devolution moving forward, these are the things that we would expect to be in place. So there's a kind of a readiness check, and we'll be doing that joint piece of work between September and December. So we'll be kind of pulling that forward, and that's something we can talk to you about as we kind of moving in this next period.
If you can come back for a supplementary, yes.
Yeah, thank you. So is that different to in the indicative timeline, it talks about the completion of the Combined Authorities review of readiness on page 15 being potentially separate to the government being in the process of appointing an external contractor to formally review?
We've done some work
So
against the old criteria, I think, but there's a new framework coming forward. So that we've had a quick look at how we might perform. So we've looked at all the documentation that we might need to pull together for a readiness check. We've looked at some of the areas that are set out in there, like, for example, one of the things is around strategy. Have we got some major strategies in place? We've done some work around that to prepare for the formal readiness check, just so that we can
just for my benefit, that work is where we've come to the conclusion that we are unlikely to not be able to meet recommendations. That's where the evidence is. Yeah,
there's no kind of major things flagging up at the minute that mean that we wouldn't meet the core criteria.
Right. Thank you.
I think it's where you might move into the other categories that is the next piece of work that we're looking at.
Councillor Haig, then Councillor Merritt.
Thank you. One of the great concerns of this committee, I think, is about accountability, especially democratic accountability for decision making. And you mentioned, and it's at 3.6 in the report as well, appointing and remunerating up to 7 commissioners. Is that something that the Mayor is likely to want to do? If she does, then how do they fit in with the thematic groups, the scrutiny, and at what point does an actual elected person take responsibility for those decisions?
So at the minute, we've not discussed whether or not we would want any of the commissioners. I think if you have a commissioner, you would need to kind of pay for them as well. So there's a cost to having commissioners. I think where the government might want to see us kind of appoint commissioners, where there might be something where there's an area of expertise that we would want to pull into the organisation. So, for example, around planning, or that is something that potentially we've not been involved in previously, or, for example, health. So if we are taking on additional kind of responsibilities in relation to health, and we need to do more alignment across the health agenda, there might be opportunities where we would want to pull in somebody that would bring in that further expertise. But we've not, at the minute, I don't think we've sat and said, well, we definitely want a commissioner, because we don't know what's coming through in the bill.
That's probably something for the mayor. So what we'll do is we'll take a note of that question, we'll send it to the mayor, and we'll ask her to give her a response to you.
I mean, I clearly intend to ask the mayor the same question,
Yeah.
but in your understanding of how commissioners would work, how is the democratic accountability? Because that's not how they work in other areas necessarily. It's not about.
Have you had any discussion at all?
I mean, you can just bring in an officer who's an expert, can't you, and pay them accordingly.
Have you even had any informal discussions with the mayor about how it might work? If you've not had any informal discussions even, you can't at this point give an answer to that.
We've not had those discussions around how that would work in practice, and I think that's largely because, you know, the bill is working its way through, and we'd need to work out kind of what this means for some of the functional areas. So some of that level of detail is not there at present, so we've not had that conversation, but clearly there is a democratic responsibility within the organisation for making decisions, and we would need to be ensuring that we follow and make those decisions. So I don't think we would necessarily then be kind of making decisions through a commissioner. They would be potentially operating in that kind of advisory role.
We'll definitely report that question to the mayor and ask that we get a written response to that point. So, Councillor Merritt, and then Councillor Godwin.
Thank you, Chair. It's also on the risk and mitigation section 4.3, where you're discussing whether the powers that we're going to get are necessarily going to be quite right, and potential issues in terms of where they're not. And you've said that significant work's underway. What's the timescale on that? Where is it going to be reported? And can you give us a heads up on where you think there might be problems at the moment, at least?
So I think this is where previously where we've looked at some of the powers, and we don't think they necessarily go far enough in terms of the responsibilities that we'd like. So a good example of that is around skills, for example, where we think that there's additional kind of activity that we would want to do, for example, in that 16 to 18-year-old space. And for example, around a push for kind of an all access to kind of all the level of funding that you would get through the skills system. So we're pushing around some of that, and they're things that potentially through a right to request we would be asking for additional powers, because part of this is around being able to kind of influence the system and make sure that we're able to kind of work through the pipeline. So the 16 to 18-year-old is one where at the minute, you know, we've got the ability to work with 18-year-olds, but actually having access to people earlier through that pipeline of learning and training would be beneficial. And we've been doing quite a bit of work through, for example, our response to the spending review, to continually push for these. When we respond to the autumn budget statements that we fetch to the combined authority, we continually make some of these points. And I think the danger is that, I guess, as more interested parties comment on the bill, that the powers could reduce. And what we want to do is to be able to use the full extent of those powers to be able to deliver, obviously, for communities across West Yorkshire.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of some of the other areas that you've talked about, what work is going on in terms of looking at the health and the public safety and these other things, which perhaps are not as well defined. And I'm thinking particularly on public safety. In one sense, it looks sort of fairly narrow, sort of policing fire and so on. But, you know, we seem to be having increasing problems with community cohesion, with re-emergence of, you know, racism, you know, and a lot of problems around that. Is public safety and the powers that are proposed going to be adequate to look at some of those types of challenges? And what are we doing on that?
the powers at the minute are around fire, the fire service, and potentially around local resilience. So there's an opportunity, I guess, through the local resilience side to pick up some of those issues. But at the minute, I think one of the big things is around transfer of powers relating to fire. And again, I think it's a timeline for bringing on those powers. We understand that some of the new areas will potentially bring those powers forward sooner than kind of established areas. Obviously, some areas within the country have already got access to those kind of powers anyway. So some of the work that we're looking at is around how other areas have done some of this previously. Clearly, we've got some previous experience of transferring police and crime powers into the combined authority. So kind of we've got that as a backdrop in terms of how we might go about doing some of that work as we progress and move forward. But at the minute, those are the things that are set out in the framework in terms of the powers that are coming forward.
Yeah, Satinder.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Merritt, we have existing community cohesion programmes that the Combined Authority quite successfully deliver to key areas or key communities across the region. I imagine what you've touched on will be picked up. In terms of that translating into what, for example, the police may or may not do, that's quite dependent on an operational matter for them. I just want to focus on fire and rescue. So West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service is the 4th largest metropolitan fire and rescue service in England and Wales. The scale and responsibility of the transfer of governance to this combined authority requires a huge amount of work. I personally, as the existing monitoring officer for another fire and rescue service, I'm really looking forward to that in terms of the combined authority picking that up. And so key features for fire and rescue services and for you as elected members will be the focus on prevention and response. I hope that helps, Councillor Merritt.
So just for the sake of the people who are listening in, we don't actually have any politician to answer some of these questions today because, to the best of my knowledge, I think there's a West Yorkshire leaders meeting, so all the leaders are currently, that's where the mayor is as well. That's why the mayor's not able to be with us today. Now, I'm not still ask political questions, but we need to be aware that the officers cannot answer political questions or political dimension to them. Both the officers present today will give you good quality answers, but we need to be aware that they cannot stray on to political things because they really are then in a bit of a, with the governance officer being present, they might then be reminded that that's what they have to do. So that said, so Councillor Godwin and then Councillor Ron.
Yes, we've been through a phase over the past few years of centralisation of power, and now we're going back to spreading it out again, which I think this is an aim of doing. But what I'm unclear about is how the hierarchy of power is going to work. If there's a clash at the different levels. So say, for example, the mayor wanted to do something in Bradford, but the people in Bradford Council didn't want to do it. How is that sort of clash, if it couldn't be negotiated, going to be dealt with? In other words, you do this because I say so and not because you agree. At the end of the day, I think this is going to become more and more difficult, particularly when you're dealing with, which you mentioned, 16 to 18-year-old education and possible planning of routes of trams and housing developments, etc., where I feel there's going to be potential and probability of conflict. How's that going to be resolved?
So I think we have kind of well-established partnership arrangements in this region. I think which are, you know, not necessarily the case in other areas, and I think we do a lot of work with our partners to kind of make sure that we're not necessarily in a position where the combined authority is saying you must do this. I don't think that's necessarily where we've been at, and I know in terms of the work that we do, that we wouldn't necessarily want to be in that position where we're enforcing things. I think the framework has been established so that it's really clear about the functions that are delivered at different levels across the different tiers of government. And I think, again, that's back to the point I made earlier around that consistency of approach, to make sure that it's really clear about who is doing what. And we're also kind of looking at what this means for different areas of our activity, so I think we've got a good, strong track record of working in partnership. I think the framework gives us, and the 7 areas of competencies give us that defined areas that we would work in. And I think where there is anything that we have to deliver in partnership, we would work with our partners across the region to kind of do that. And if there are areas that we do have disagreements in, we'd take them on board one by one, I guess, and work them through as we need to do to kind of progress policy development within the region. So I think we've luckily not been in that position today. I do think people do look at some of the kind of the working in this area, and not with envy necessarily, but we have had some good relationships in place. So, but the framework is a good way of kind of making sure that we've got that delineation, I guess, of activity.
Is there anything in the proposal, the devolution proposals, as to what are there going to be any rights of veto given to any local authorities on anything? Where it comes to, for example, where housing could or couldn't be built, are there going to be any vetoes being made available, or is it all, or does the mayor have ultimate decision-making powers that she would like to bring all the local authorities with her, but in the event that she feels she needs to take a decision that is for the betterment of West Yorkshire, in her opinion, and she's got a mandate for it, does the devolution deal allow her to implement it, or do the local authorities have a right to veto it?
So Cinda might be able to kind of give a bit more detail on this, but the proposals do give the mayor kind of like a kind of casting vote, I think, and but I think in the spirit of how we work, that is not necessarily something that we would want to be kind of always enacting, and we've got CA decision making kind of protocols in place, haven't we, through that process?
Which should only be used in exceptional circumstances. I accept that, but ultimately, what might happen, I think, is we hope it never reaches that stage and that everything will be done as consensual as possible. But it would be interesting. Do you know whether
I don't think there are any powers of veto that are set out in the bill, but obviously, Satinder.
Just to confirm what Sarah's just said, there currently are no powers of veto, but I think it's important to bear in mind the draft legislation envisages the combined authority act in a different way. So it is to be labelled or conduct itself as a strategic mayoral authority. So if you apply the lens of elected members setting the strategies for officers to implement. So the same principle applies. The combined authority, as Sarah has said, with local district partners will agree the strategy, and then it's for that strategy to be implemented locally. I think it's important not to forget that overarching principle in terms of the combined authority becoming a strategic authority and not doing the doing so much, if that helps.
Yeah, I mean, I know you probably all live in the world of consensus, but you're about to take on health as well. And I can assure you that doesn't live in the world of consensus. And there is slightly impositionary attitude from the Department of Health. In fact, there's an entirely impositionary attitude from the Department of Health. And I wondered how that was going to work with this, against this consensus attitude that you seem to be developing. And I have to say that taking on planning will be another of those areas where you might think it's all going to be jolly and fine, but I can tell you for free that it isn't. And I think putting in tram tracks is a typical example. You only have to look at HS2 to find out what happens there. And if you're going to be run something in the future through Shipley, I can tell you there will be about 4,000 people oppose it, even though it's entirely sensible, led by my colleague here.
I'm not
that's what I'm saying. I think it might be slightly pie in the sky not to think about those powers of what you might, people who might be opposed to a sensible strategy as considered by the combined authority.
And we live in that world now, don't we? We are taking decisions that you know, and I've worked in a local authority before. I worked here for 30 years, so I'm not adverse to kind of understanding some of the things that you're talking about. I think the question was around how we will work collectively together to ensure that we can make decisions. At some point, if a decision needs to be made, a decision will be made, weighing up the evidence around the best way forward, won't it? And we understand that is what happens in kind of decision-making processes and the combined authority itself. So even now we make decisions that not everybody necessarily always agrees with everything that we're making a decision on, but we have to press forward, don't we, on making some of those decisions. On health, we'll be getting powers around health, and the mayor will potentially have a role on the integrated care board. But that at the minute it's not clear what all of that will look like, and we won't necessarily be we'll be sitting in that space with other partners like local authorities who also have responsibility for kind of public health as well. So we were expecting more around health as the 10-year plan kind of develops and comes out around some of that. But again, the mayor will have that opportunity to sit on the ICB. So some of that will flow through, I think, as we've not got an awful lot of detail around that. And of course, we won't be getting any funding or to deliver around health. So it's very much around the bill, as I mentioned earlier, around some of the powers around that, bringing that convening role, pulling people together. It might not necessarily be around delivering in some of that space, although we do quite a little bit of work at the minute around things like health in all policies. It's making sure that the work that we do in the combined authority is taking account some of that public health activity. So we've got a joint appointment, for example, with the ICB, Jen Connolly, who at the moment is already making sure that some of the work that we're doing is taking account of some of the responsibilities that we'll be getting through this bill. So I think we're a little bit ahead on some of the things that are set out in the bill that we need to take account of moving forward. But we're not necessarily going to be delivering on health. It will be around that convening power, I think, that we'll be looking at.
Thank you. Right, so Councillor Laundrie and Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah. My question, if I can take you back to paragraph 4.3 that colleague Councillor Merritt raised. In the risks and mitigations, and the concern that it says the concern that these measures do not go far enough in key areas, and I know you mentioned skills and FE at that point. I'm just thinking, if they don't go far enough, I mean, what does this mean for practice? I'm assuming that a right to request and sort of the doesn't cut it. Then the concern is that. That's not going to bridge the gap here, and I'm sort of thinking, is this something that we just have to be prepared to take as a hit, or I mean, it's true, this is probably as we're getting into the realm of politics here, where you won't want to go, but it sounds like if this is the mayor's view, then she might be contemplating using her soft power to seek amendments to the bill. I mean, what is the feeling about this? How serious is this risk? Is it going to hobble us going forward, or is there something that needs addressing at the political level? What do you think?
I think this bill definitely takes us forward. We'll have an integrated settlement. We'll have more flexibility around how we use the funding that we've got, which is a big advantage, and we're putting in place plans to ensure that is implemented from April next year. I think we will use the right to request, and we will continue to use our influence to shape that bill as it works its way through, and as we kind of understand what that bill is coming forward, we'll continue to, I guess, use all of the levers that we've got in our power to kind of press for that. And the mayor will do that, but we'll also do that through some of the officer groups that we've got in terms of trying to shape and influence this as it kind of moves forward. But the right to request is something that I think is an opportunity, particularly for established mayoral authorities, to kind of say these are the things that we want to kind of explore in more detail. And some of the work that we're doing with the other established mayoral authorities is to make sure that we're that we've got a shared view, so that we can use the weight of collectively to kind of press where we do think that there's that opportunity to kind of go further. But there is an ambition to kind of go further and deepen, and particularly when we know that we've got some challenges that need addressing.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And one more of it. As I say, we've spoken about skills. Do you have any other areas in mind where you think this is sort of particularly pertinent? And there's sort of a reason for questions. Is a bit of a constant refrain for me. I'm always sort of thinking about how widely understood the work of the combined authority is in the general public, and the responsibilities of the mayor. And I think people sort of have a sense that it's to do with buses, it's to do with trams, and perhaps they might think, well, as the deputy mayor does the police as well. Skills probably isn't very sort of widely known as or thought of as a combined authority responsibility. Are there other areas in here that you'd like to mention at this point? Couldn't we go a bit further with this, and couldn't we get them better known to the general public?
I think some of the other areas that we're pushing on are around fiscal levers, that having the right revenue raising powers to kind of deliver. So there's some push around how we are, properly funded to do some of the work that we do, which is so, for example, one area is around that we had in the spending review. I know some of the local authorities have been pushing is around, for example, potentially a visitor levy is one area where it potentially doesn't go far enough. But these are things that we'll be continually trying to push forward, and the things that they're not new things. They're things that we've consistently said these would be good things to kind of have that would enable us to kind of deliver. But I think it's an important point around how do people know and understand what the combined authorities are going to do, and we have been doing a little bit of piece of work with our local authority partners around how we can engage more around that, kind of using and gaining an understanding about what the mayor does, but also kind of how this impacts and how we work collectively together to deliver on some of these agendas, because I think it's really important. I think the point that Satinder made, a lot of what we do is done in partnership. We don't just do this for ourselves as a combined authority. We're doing this because some of this funding flows through to local authorities, and it has a huge impact on the ground, and which is why I think we're so passionate around the bill and making sure that it gets to local people and communities and makes a difference to their lives. But we definitely want to do more in that space.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Sarah. Thank you for the presentation today. And Chairman, instead of going through a direction through point 3.4, I think the comments I want to make is in general over the report we've got today. Thank you very much. It's obvious from the report today that taking a mirror image of Greater Manchester is actually influenced the report of how the combined authority today is intending to go, and using that as an example, as you have done in West Midlands as well, because we are aware of what the Greater Manchester Combined Authority did take on in their first year of settlement from April 25, and they were in readiness for it. The question of readiness obviously is a big issue in terms of the governance arrangement through the next process as well, and I think that is a concern. I think I'm also very concerned about what the bill is creating, Chair, in the general power of competence, an existing broad gender power which will enable mayoral strategic authorities to undertake any lawful activity in response to part of your question, Chair, to achieve outcomes within the 7 areas of competence as outlined above. Now, that in itself is actually a very, very broad range of powerful legal duties, and the reflection of those in terms of local authorities has got to be considered as well, because when you take into account planning and highways and other functions in terms of education, attainment and all the rest of it, send all the other activities, then there's got to be the governance arrangements and the support and indeed the resources to do it. But in terms of that in itself, the question has got to be is how does that reflect on the budgets and resources of local authorities? Because once you've taken away the planning resources, you've taken away the housing resources, and for my part of working in local government in the health service for many, many years, I have to say I have grave reservations about the health agenda, because that's my portfolio. And I'm really disappointed, I have to say, that going along the lines of Andy Burnham, who was the first mayor to take this on, I don't know what experience you've had of it, but I'm fearful that in terms of these issues alone, from a democratic point of view, it takes away local democracy and indeed the voice of local people. Because I then go on to the next point under 3.7, which says a power to convene and a duty to respond. And I think this comes down to your question as well, Chair. This will enable mayors to convene local partners to address local challenges. It will also place a duty on local partners, who we assume are going to be local councils and everybody in terms of partners, which would be a health partner, to respond to a mayor's request when they make use of the power to convene. The specific local partners covered will be set out in a subsequent secondary legislation. We've had the first reading of the bill, and we're going into the second reading of the bill. So does that mean, Sarah, that there's more to come in terms of devolution of powers from local people, where they have the right to their local democracy to actually work on behalf of their constituents? Now that's a worry. And as well as that, I appreciate that under 3.10 you've got local government settlement structures and accountability. Well, a lot of us around here, we have mayors anyway. But with the mayor structure in terms of the new measures, obviously some of those may reflect on there again the local people knowing their local structure. And I think there's a heck of a lot of work to be done in that one. You've mentioned as well in it a policy document here about mayor strategic authorities eligible for settlements, etc. And forgive me, I've been through the document and I think there's lots for us to be concerned about in terms of the future going forward. For instance, you have a timetable in here under 3.2.1 on page 15, and it sets out the framework here on the integrated settlement as going forward. And it's a deadline date here in it as well. September to October, government publishes the formal quantum. Forgive me, Chair, if there's words in here that may have further background information, but I think that information should be imparted to us all here to know what the implications of that quantum is. And then in September to October, the government is going to publish again the formal quantum. Now, we all know, sitting around this table a long time around dealing with all these things, we all know that there's always terms of reference and consequences behind them. Could we have an explanation of what the quantum is and what that's going to impact and where, and what the emphasis is behind it? I think the other part of the document, in terms of the work on the devolution and community empowerment bill and the integrated settlement, and it says there has been seen already, further work will be required to ensure region maximisations are available. So is that further work going on in parallel with the other areas that are still to be brought forward in terms of information, resources and outcomes? I've always had a view on outcomes, Chair. You've got to see the worth of them. And I think when we come to it in terms of one other issue, if I may, the Chair's identified as well, as we all have here, about the need to be working in partnership. There's lots of partners involved, but those partners through democratic process have an accountability themselves. It actually says that West Yorkshire authorities and WICA will need to be strong and operate within agreed principles, agreed at a senior level. Now, this is not a political question by any means, but what this is a query of what can be considered a senior level. Because from an overview and scrutiny situation, members, no matter what level of a government they're at, have to know a process of how you get through from the local democracy in terms of accountability to a senior level, and how does that quote-unquote senior level refer itself to ICAP. There's several other things, Chair, that have issues that I've penciled out here. Sarah, it's been a long question and concerns, but I do think that at this point, again, Chair, for scrutiny's purposes, I think the emphasis on this report should have been brought to us far earlier. We're in a process now where we're going to be into 26 before we know where we're at. 25 is nearly gone with a blink. And the reassurance of what we're going to be able to do of resources through your good self and others. The last question on that is there, because of that process, Chair, and the need for resources, which meaning people, staff, is there at this point a cost to the revenue now in order to implement the needs of this future?
Right. A lot of the questions there are of a political nature. For example, poor Rachel Reeves has got to answer the vast majority of these in the coming weeks, and I think if somebody could give her a solution to them, I think she would welcome it, to be quite frank, because that's what, when the devolution bill first came out, the quantum of the financial problems we've got in this country weren't probably well known, and a lot of, well, you and I have been discussing this, that you know, the government are going to have to make some decisions, and tough decisions, as to where the money is going to go, what they're going to spend it on, what they're going to release, how we're going to fund the mass transit. Is it through a tourist tax? Is it through a roof tax? Is it through a mayoral precept? All of these, but to do that, none of us actually have, no combined authority actually has these powers just now. So the government need to decide the consequences of it. The Office of Budget Responsibility will certainly have a comment on it. Treasury will almost certainly have big concerns about delegating to local government tax raising powers, because they like to keep things under their wings. So answer what you can. Khaled's taken a note of everything that Councillor Rhodes raised. Some of them do require, I'm trying to think how to put this diplomatically, people other than yourself, a senior or a higher pay grade, if I can put it as diplomatically as that, to make some of those known, because they were very good questions, but as I say, answer the ones you're willing to answer, but I don't want you to get yourself into bother.
I'm not going to get myself into bother, and we can have other conversations, I think, if some more detail around it. To provide clarification if need be, but the intention around the general power of competence is not to kind of say, well, you can just do absolutely anything that you want and you can take powers away from local authorities. Indeed, you know, so that power is linked to the 7 areas of competence. So we wouldn't be able to start getting into the realms of working on education or SEND or any of those areas. That just would not be possible, and nor would we be getting the budgets to enable us to do that piece of work. And I think, back to the point that I made earlier, I think what this bill is doing is being really clear about what strategic authorities would do, and really clear about the, kind of what's in the domain of local authority. So this isn't about wholeheartedly shifting the powers away from or democratic accountability at a local level to a strategic authority. That is not what this is about. So I hope that provides some reassurance. But what it does do is give some freedom to say, well, actually, if we get resource around transport, but we think there are some opportunities there to look more broadly around how that transport works in a local area, and we're not rigidly sticking to things that don't allow us the discretion to think about how we might implement, if that makes sense. I think on the quantum for the integrated settlement, at the minute, what we know is that there'll be a number of funds that are currently already that we may already access, that will be brought together in the themes that I talked about earlier. So I think I said at the integrated settlement there'll be 6 themes, And we know that there'll be various funding that will be coming forward under each of those themes. So we potentially know what some of those funding streams are now. We just don't know the level of funding that will necessarily be coming our way under each of those funding streams. And there will be a level of flexibility in the integrated settlement. We know that we'll be able to kind of move 10% between those funding streams. But as I said earlier, because we're pulling lots of funding streams together potentially under theme, that gives us more ability to be flexible about how we use that resource. What we don't know and what we won't know until we get that information, and some of this is linked to the fair funding review and the budget, we won't know the exact amounts of money that we will be getting. We will know some of the measures and the targets that we need to deliver against. So whilst there might be not any greater pots of money, the flexibility in that money might give us some opportunity to kind of say, well, actually, we think this is the way that we'd like to spend that money based on what we know already around evidence in West Yorkshire. So I think, you know, if there's more information needed about clarity around the bill, I think there is, I'm not going to lie, there is going to be quite a bit of work for us to do between now and December to prepare for the integrated settlement. But obviously the bill is on a bit of a longer term trajectory. Where things are coming forward, so for example on spatial development strategy, we're trying to engage in conversations about them through our partnerships to make sure that we're engaging and we're involving people throughout this process. But as I said earlier, it's not all going to come at once. So as things come forward, we'll be talking to yourselves and talking to colleagues around some of that. So I just want to provide some reassurance, really. This isn't about, you know, strategic authorities taking over and doing everything and taking that power away, because clearly the roles, the local authorities have got an incredibly important role, and we work with you to deliver locally. So that is not about that.
I was on the shadow for 5 years, and it's so important to understand what the outcome of this is going to be. For instance, you've got what's called local place. That's the on the ground tier of the funding that's put through to your local health in your own authority. Its overall ICB body is up there, the board. Now, in terms of that as a situation, this is very concerning to local people, and it will be until we get some clarification of how this is going to work in terms of the issues around local people, housing and health. It's so important. For instance, we've had a maternity birthing ward closed down in our authority at a time when maternity services nationally are under scrutiny for neonatal and obstetrics. Leeds and Bradford, as you know yourselves, are one of them. That was passed down. They agreed it, and it was passed down to the local place board. Now, through that process of trying to look to keep a facility for birthing at one of our hospitals, that was backed by hundreds and hundreds of local people in protest at the loss. And it was closed down originally because of the lack of staff, and they moved staff away from it to Pinderfields Hospital. That's what happened. Now, that ICB board went down to the local board, and the local board made a decision to close it. It was temporary, it's permanent now. In that process, all I want to identify to you, and in terms of housing strategy and everything else, is that in that process, democracy took its place in the community, in people. What I can't see in this, and I've been looking at Andy Burnham's health over there, I cannot see in this where local people, through their local representatives, are going to be able to have the right to do as our constituents have done over a period of time. And that's just an example. And it doesn't give you any more detail other than you followed Andy Burnham's policy over there. I think everywhere is different. Everywhere is different. And there's no general fit for all everywhere. But I have to say that to me and other things that's happening needs a lot more clarity for the people of our local districts.
Making sure that we've got call-in procedures. And you go, Sarah.
Just in terms of health, we won't be getting any funding at all to deliver on our health. I think the 10-year plan for health, as well as kind of talking about the role of strategic authorities, which I think is this strategic role, talks about neighbourhood health quite significantly. And I think, you know, that ability to work at that neighbourhood level, which I think has been done, is something that is a feature of the West Yorkshire health system, is something that is featuring in the 10-year plan. So I think neighbourhood health plans will still exist. The funding, as far as I'm aware, will still flow through to local communities. Currently, the plans aren't that we would get any resource to deliver on health. So in terms of the functional responsibilities around health, it will be at the moment around that convening power. It will be around a health in all policies power. It won't be about delivering some of the things that you're currently talking about in terms of kind of flowing through to that local area. That's not what we've got in front of us at the moment.
But the combined authority is going to be given responsibility for the infrastructure needs of the whole of West Yorkshire, where they're going to have to summon all of the major providers of services, including the health service. And one of the roles of the combined authority is to make sure that they are putting in place sufficient infrastructure needs to meet the development needs of the West Yorkshire area, which means that someone's going to have to decide, and if it's been set at a strategic level, you might say, right, we need an extra 6 hospitals, but someone's going to have to implement those 6 hospitals. And that's when you're going to have confusion as to where is the hospital going to be. Is it going to be in position A, which is near, you know, and more precisely what you're going to do in some parts of Calderdale, which are rural, really are rural, and it's how you're going to make sure that there is access to services there. It's fine that if you're in Halifax, or if you're in Leeds, or if you're in Dewsbury, you'll have access to those things, but if you're in some of the outer areas, the same thing in Leeds as well, in the rural areas, that's where you're going to get very complicated. But I think we'll park that one and we'll put that into making sure that when we look into these work streams more thoroughly, we ask for greater detail without taking forward. So on that basis, can I now call Councillor McCarthy, then Councillor Berry, then Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. In 316 and 317 of the report, it's talking about an outcomes framework, which kind of forms the basis of any agreed funding, and also will kind of have targets that are aligned to it, and also an outcomes programme board, which will kind of serve as the mechanism of contact between the combined authority, central government, and also have a role in overseeing delivery. My question is about what would the extent of elected members be in terms of both determining the outcomes framework and also overseeing or even participating in the outcomes programme board. I guess my question is sort of, there's already a sense among some elected members that the combined authority kind of is very officer-led, and because we don't directly sit on the combined authority itself, we're co-opted into it. A lot of these roles are overseen by leaders, for example. So yeah, if you could look into that, thank you.
So in terms of the outcomes, the government will work with us around a series of measures that we will need to kind of implement, and we'll so some of those are measures. So already you will already see published the measures that the Trailblazers are working towards at the moment, and as we kind of money flows into the individual themes, there'll be a set of measures that we need to work. So some of that is going to be prescribed measures that we will need to deliver on to kind of pull the funding down. I think some of those measures that some government departments have got quite a significant number of measures in space, others have got less. So we haven't got complete freedom, is what I'm going to say, to just pick and choose what we deliver for the resources that we're going to get. We will have to negotiate around those outcomes framework. There'll be a tight timeline between now and December to kind of understand which are the measures we want to take forward against what outcomes. So it might be that in this area, in Manchester, they want to focus on one thing, but that's not a priority in our particular area. And these are the things that we want to focus on, which will decide the measures that we want to take forward. The quantum will then decide how much of those things that we can deliver. The outcomes board, at the minute, one hasn't met in Manchester or Greater Manchester or in the West Midlands at the moment. They meet 6 months after to kind of review progress on targets. That's how we understand that those boards will work. But we've got no more detail on how that would work at the moment. But obviously, as we're working our way through, we can talk about how that would operate. Is that okay in terms of answering the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It's not so much.
But we can definitely provide more detail once we get that detail.
I mean, it's not so much a supplementary question, more of a comment, I think, just to say, as much as possible, kind of like make sure there's at least some elected member oversight of what that's doing, because it does seem it's very prominent, for example, in the policy document that the government have set out.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
We can definitely pick that up.
Councillor Berry, then Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, following on from colleagues, I'm concerned that we get the transparency and the ability to explain what's going on much clearer to people out there, because there is a bit of a crisis of legitimacy in local government, and Redcliffe Maud was a long time ago, and this is proving to be more convoluted than even that. And therefore, the overarching purpose needs to be clear, that we're trying to make people's lives better, and we're trying to restore the ability and the belief in people to make things better, because that's the bit that's becoming most corrosive. But the starting point of that will all hang on the formula discussions, and let's see where we get to with the formula discussions, because I'm keenly watching that. And then there's some suggestions about where we might want to be looking at where the missing gaps are, working with young people, looking at the issues of NEET, training and skills, DWP. Really, you can't achieve much of what we're wanting to do unless you can join those pieces in the lives, because the overarching problem, like Dave was referring to, is inclusive growth and inequality, right? You can call it whatever you want, but it's income inequality and shortened lives. So we're not talking about the health service. Local government lost that in 1947. We're talking about creating healthier communities to reduce the demand on a sickness service, which we've got. And to that end, on health, the governance issues and the ICB, which in West Yorkshire is generally considered to be quite far-sighted. I don't understand why, when you're looking at the fire service, and I'm interested in that because they have some of the best data analysts on risk and inequality that anybody's got. So bringing that in and aligning it with health, but why isn't the ambulance service part of this framework? Because really those services reach into a similar area. But that's just perhaps an agenda. I was chair of the YMAS board until 2006, and I'm aware of how much that reaches. And I can't see how we can avoid looking at some of what's being done in Manchester to begin to steer the health inequalities. But at the moment, the health service is, to say the least, a stressed organisation about structure and form. You need some of that to get through. So I'm concerned that we come out of this with what some of my colleagues are saying is what are we trying to achieve? How do you explain it to Mrs. Jones on Coronation Avenue or Mrs. Miggins in Wibsey? Because I'm a complete local government nerd. I've been doing it for decades, but I am beginning to worry about how we explain this to people who are feeling they're not better off, that they can't get to where they need to, and their lives. The strategies need to be distilled into something a bit more tangible, is what I'm saying. Because I'm coming here and spending a lot of time, and I can see a lot of money coming through, and I can see some really good things that, I don't want this to sound like a criticism, but there is a bit of a Wyker speak that we need to distill back into people's people's lives. I'll finish at that because I think there's a huge amount to be made clear yet, but I don't think we're necessary. I think we're not asking for some of the things that, well, we need to ask for some other things and powers, but we're still circling around this problem of what's the relationship with the local elected democratic responsibility, and that does need some serious thinking.
So I think the point around what does this mean in practice is a point well made. I think this is a paper, isn't it, on a bill, and translating that bill into kind of what will change and what will make a difference to people's lives I think that's an important point, and that's one that we'll definitely take away and have a think about as we progress this next period of work. We are looking at how we do some of that engagement more broadly. So I think that is a really a good point well made. Just on health, I think it was probably remiss of me not to say that some of the work that we've done around health in all policies is around things like healthy working lives. So how do we work collectively with colleagues in the health system and our local authorities around skills, for example, and making sure that people can get into work. So we're already doing some of that work in partnership collectively together because we know that will make a difference to people's lives, and people will be able to access more resources and jobs. So some of that work is stuff that we're already kind of, I think, working quite collaboratively on. We've got Healthy Lives Board, which I think all local authorities are part of. So I think your point around this is about healthy communities and it's about making that difference on people's lives is something that I think when we thinking about writing these reports we could do a little bit better on. So I will definitely take that one away.
And therefore terms like convening, I mean I see convenings all over the education system at the moment. Sorry. The use of the term convening and convening partnership is usually a way of describing, ooh, that's difficult, we need to get lots of people together.
I think just back on some of the language, this language isn't our language as well. So just to say that this isn't language this is the language in the bill, and I think what we're trying to do is show you what's in the bill. What I wouldn't want to do is like go away and start talking about something different to make. So, but I definitely take on board the point about what does that mean for us. But what we're trying to do here is explain something that is a very long bill. There's a lot of detail and technical information in that into some vestige of something that explains. But I take the point around how, you know, what will that mean for the work that we do moving forward.
So in response to Councillor Rhodes' question, you said that the proposals on they're not there to try and take powers away from local authorities, but in reality, in terms of what's being proposed for some of the planning stuff, for example, there is kind of an element of taking some of the power away from local authorities in what's being proposed. So the spatial development strategies will sit above local plans, and there's an expectation that local plans must comply with the spatial and the SPSs, but there's not necessarily the same implication that the SPS must comply with the local plans. And then once adapted, the SDSs will form part of the material, like the planning considerations at a planning committee. Councillors must take into account what the SDS said, and that will take primacy in that, so if that contradicts with the local plan. So effectively there is an element of, effectively, a bit of power shifting on the spatial planning stuff up to the WICA level. And I mean, Councillor Berry said it earlier, like planning is one of those issues that it's obviously very contentious, and the public feel very frustrated that they don't get much say in this process as it is, and that's with councillors who are their elected representatives in the mix. When you start taking in the WICA, which feels a lot more distant, there's a real risk that actually could start eroding the public confidence in the planning system if all of these decisions are being moved up a tier to something that's much less accessible for them. I was going to ask for you to say a bit more about what work's being done on that already, but given the time constraints, I won't ask you to do that. But just quickly, are there any conflicts or challenges you see in terms of how WICA, what WICA is going to encounter in that kind of sphere? and what specifically what are WICA going to do to ensure that the public do have consideration in this. Already, I mean, I had a look at some of the websites between the different combined authorities on the different development strategies, and I must say, of the ones I saw, the WICA was the most difficult for me to understand. Like some of the others were much better. So yeah, I was just wondering if you could just expand on some of that for us.
Apologies, I do keep forgetting. But we are doing quite a bit of work with local authorities in this space at the minute, and there's quite a long trajectory. We are trying to do some early work. I think probably on some of the detail of that, it might be useful for us to kind of bring Liz in at some point, Councillor Anderson, to talk about some of that work that is taking place, because I think it is fairly complex, as you say. There's lots of different, not different views, but I think a bit how we move it forward is something that we're trying to do together to make sure that we're not having some of the issues that you've talked about. I think the point around it not necessarily looking great on the website in terms of how it's kind of explained, I think is something that I can take away. But I think that might be something that we need to get into a little bit more detail around, is the spatial development strategy.
I wanted to break this question off secretly, but I mean, when we've talked about this, we've talked specifically about partners, and in your answer there, actually, you didn't say partners, you said local authorities, which is good, because certainly when you're coming into planning, I was just wondering to what extent WICA would see housing developers as being partners in this process, because I think that's also where a lot of the distrust comes in, that the housing developers are seen to have an inroad in this process, and that same inroad doesn't necessarily filter through to community groups, so they don't feel like they have the same way of being listened, because obviously local authorities are there to work on behalf of residents. They have that's their motive. Property developers aren't there with the development, they're not there for the public good, they're there for the profit margins. And we just need to make sure that's counted, and obviously I would say that it's just making sure that's being counterbalanced by making sure the public have an avenue to properly feed into this, and community groups and residents associations and all of that, because it starts getting massive when you start looking at this piece of work.
We can definitely take that away. I can feed that one back, and that might be something that we come back and talk to you about as part of this work as it's evolving. I'll talk to colleagues around that in the...
Councillor Merritt, then Councillor Bithell, and Councillor Hunt.
Yes, two things. The first, I also wanted to ask about the strategic planning, but the relationships down have been covered. What about the relationships with the National Infrastructure Commission and the National Infrastructure Plan and so on? What will be the interrelationship? Will the CA have any influence upwards into future versions of the National Infrastructure Plan, or is it in effect we just have to live with what comes down from the top in that respect? The other thing is, I just wanted to pick up on Councillor Berry's point, which I thought was extremely good, about the issue of comms. But I don't think it's just about comms. I think one of the issues that we've got is the system's become so complex, people don't understand it, and they don't see how it relates to them. So the whole credibility of this whole superstructure, we're all trying to do our best, and people probably recognise that we're trying to do our best, but actually, as you say, they don't feel they have any influence. They don't see how it relates to them, and where their say is in it. And the problem is the whole system's become, as I say, we're losing credibility, and that's big trouble down the line.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think just in terms of that ability to influence, I think part of some of the work that we have been asking is around that duty to collaborate with arm's length bodies, because that is really important in terms of not only that power to convene local partners, but that power to kind of make sure that arm's length bodies are around the table, and that we're able to influence and talk to them in a way, because that we do know that is a challenge on particularly with some kind of agencies. So I think that is something that we're continually pushing for, and I think we would be, wanting to make sure that where we can, not only work collectively locally, but influence more upwards as well. So yeah, but I agree around some of the complexity of the systems that we work in are quite difficult, aren't they, to explain to local people in terms of what difference some of this makes to their lives. So I think there's some good points there that we can definitely have a think about.
Councillor Bithell, then Councillor Hunt.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Just a really quick one from me. The equality and diversity implications in the report, it says this report doesn't have any directly. I think I can understand why that's what's been in there, but actually the impact of this is going to be massive on our diverse communities. So it would be really helpful for us to have a equality and diversity assessment done sooner rather than later, and scrutiny to see it, so that it doesn't become almost a tag in when we do it on the individual policies later on. Thank you.
I think that's a really important point, and I think everything that we bring forward, we will need to make sure that it's got those kind of EDI considerations. It's really, really important. Into just back to some of the points about what differences it's going to make, and how do we understand some of the impact of this on our community. So completely take that point, and we will make sure that as we progress and we move forward, it's really important to me. It's part of my team are really heavily involved in this, and it's something that we're trying to get better at across the combined authority in terms of understanding. And it's back to some of the health things as well. What we're trying to do is have an integrated look at EDI and perhaps bringing in health into some of that as well, in terms of how we understand the implications across the organisation of things that we do. So I will definitely take that one away and make sure that we pick that one up.
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be very quick. So just a couple of points. Several councillors have already touched upon it, which is fantastic. It's about the fact that trying to explain to the people, so my residents, for example, what WICA is, who the mayor is, and what their role and remit, and even their existence is, has been a Sisyphean task. And obviously with the devolution framework coming in and the expanded remit, the boulder's now coming back down to the bottom of the hill. I'm having to sort of think about pushing it back up again. So the point I want to make is there going to be a market, I don't like the word marketing, so a public information strategy and a budget that moves away from the usual arm's length explaining to authorities, can you tell the people who WICA is and what we're doing? Can there be something bigger and a bit more expensive thrown at it? Because the people really do need to know who we are, what we do. This list of things is new to us. Imagine what it is to the people. So I think there needs to be something considered there on a strategic point of view. The second point of view, which segues into what I said earlier, and also this, is surrounding what I see as a very unfortunate and dangerous unravelling of the social contract. There seems to be a lot of anger out there, and I'm looking at some of these issues that we're going to be responsible for, and already I can imagine what the louder voices are going to say about things. Transport, oh, it takes ages, it's a waste of housing. I'm not even going to say about housing, we know. Public safety, if we're going to have a remit over public safety, can there be a contingency plan surrounding, I don't want to say civil unrest, but if things get difficult in society, how we can actually carry out the remit and function of some of these things we're going to be doing in a way that is palatable and works and builds community cohesion and safety, if that makes sense. So, thank you.
Sarah.
Yeah, I think there's lots of different ways which we can communicate, isn't there? We can have a big campaign and spend a lot of money. I think there are some other things that we could do better, and one of the things we've been talking to our local authorities about is how do we communicate with elected members in local authorities so that they feel better informed about the work that the combined authority does. We can definitely think about some of those public campaigns, but I think it needs much more of a multifaceted approach around kind of building that level of understanding, I think, and that's something that local authorities have been talking to us about, is around how are we doing better elected member engagement. So one of the things we're thinking about is a programme of work that we could do collectively across our local authorities to kind of make sure that elected members who are obviously at the coalface or within their communities are better informed as well. But we will be obviously looking at how we kind of communicate, and it won't necessarily be just about the bill. It'll be about the things as they specific things as they come forward, about how it's best to land messages around what that means for them. But there's been some useful comments around that today that I think we need to take away and we'll have a look at.
You. Right. So to sum then, right, in terms of paragraph 318, that's the one that we will be using for our workshop groups. We'll be working through each of those workshops. I don't know what exists nowadays, but when I was younger, we used to have Gantt charts that would tell us where the progress, you're looking at me quizzical as to what the devil's a Gantt chart.
I do know what a Gantt chart. Everyone loves a Gantt chart. That's what I was thinking in the back of my mind.
But
we've got some programme plans which we can talk to you about.
So that we know where we can fit in, because there's no point in us asking you to produce a report on X if it's not quite ready to go into the public domain. You and I were talking about things the other day that I was asking for, and you were saying, yes, good idea, but we're not quite ready to make it public. The one I was talking about was the risk register. You know, that we're not able to put that in the public domain yet, which I think is a vital one. So we'll be working through that. Khaled and Katie will be getting dates put in the diaries for the devolution working group. So if you're wanting to be part of it, and by listening to what you said today, I think you do want to be part of it, we'll try and give you as much notice so that we can. We'll be holding probably one a month, I would have thought, from now on, to try and get to the bottom of what's going on here, so that we're working with officers in order to, so we can bring things to their attention early in the cycle where things are not quite going the way that the elected members would like, and then we can have a debate as to what's happening. So that's that. So thank you very much, and thank you, Sarah, for today. Hopefully, knowing you, you'll reflect back on a lot of the things that's been said today, and you will move things forward.
Do that constantly.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
But thank you for your time as well. And some
right. So on the other side of this coin, we've got it's fine talking about the theory, but how are we going to resource all of these changes? Do we need thousands of more staff? Do we need hundreds of more staff? Do we need people at a certain level of education in order to do it? Are they highly skilled, lowly skilled? So the person who's got the answers to all of those questions, after building her up nicely, Joe, do you want to just outline, be serious, do you want to outline what you've got in your report?
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Yes, of course, and you're absolutely right. So there's many parts to this journey, and the bit that I wanted to talk about in terms of the papers are about the how, a little bit more about the how. I think the key thing for me to say is the papers that we've shared, they're really early insights into what we're doing. So it's been really fascinating listening to the comments and feedback. That it's clearly really helpful and will influence as we develop, and that's what both of these papers are also about. They're about that early insight. So the first paper around the future organisational state, again, I won't spend too much time going through it because I'm sure you've got questions, but it's primarily around the conversations that we've had around how the sort of operating model of the organisation and the decision about whether to set up an arm's length body or not. And as you can see from the paper here, that is something that we are not planning to do at this moment in time, based on the research that we've done and the feedback and the benchmarking against others. I think that in addition to that, to know the future direction, and it really hopefully complements what Sarah's been saying, is that we see our organisation focusing on commissioning and convening and influencing, and therefore as a result of that not being a local authority body where there's many people employed, but actually the skill set being of having that experience of a more senior level where they can actually facilitate, coordinate and be involved in the different stages of the work that we need to do. I think to help in the early analysis that we've done, we've tried to map across some of the key skills that we think are needed across the 7 areas of competence as part of the paper, yeah, really to share with you that we've done some benchmarking. And I will stop there and see if you've got any questions, if that's all right.
Thank you. This is a really helpful paper in terms of the fact it proves that we're thinking about this now. I guess my concern is how are we going to make sure that we're adding value to our skills in the region and not just sort of being a drain on LA officers, because like you say, there's a real skills gap that LAs are suffering with planning and things like that. So the potential for those to then, because it becomes so attractive to work here, moving to here, and then actually it just compounds the issues elsewhere. Thank you.
Happy to answer that. I've got a bit more detail in the other paper, but they are so closely linked. So are you okay if I just...
Yeah.
So a really valid point. And actually, something we're very aware of, and I'll be as blunt as saying we're at the point at the moment of identifying what they are, and then that is helping pull together what the strategies and plans are to actually then address them. So I'm almost at the point where I'm identifying the need that can help inform what the recruitment and attraction strategies will look like and how we'll do it. Now, I'm already discussing and talking with people locally, and and sharing high level resource planning with council, with other local authority leaders, with universities and colleges, because some of those things need to be around growing our own and having the forward plan, which is a really key bit about workforce planning, is about understanding in enough time for us to, where we can, forward plan how we attract from graduates to apprenticeships, how we spend our levy, how we actually develop people who are already in the organisation through that apprenticeship levy into future posts. As you can see, again, straying into the other paper, one of the things that we're really keen to do is understand how we can better manage our corporate memory and our resources, so that I'm very conscious that through all the things that Sarah's talked about, and I will use transport, it's not just all about transport, but transport's quite a good example to use. So where we are with bus franchising and the way I try and actually help segregate the phases is we're in a development stage, and then you move into delivery, and then you move into how you operate, and the resourcing and the skills and the expertise you need for that. What we're doing on bus franchising is a totally different timing phasing plan for mass transit. So in addition to managing and forecasting resourcing, we're also trying to make sure that we've got a much more flexible workforce, so that as people come off one major project, timings or it won't always work well, but we've got enough development to move them into maybe the next stage and move people across the organisation. So there's a number of different work streams that we're actually trying to make sure we grow and mature in terms of how we plan and pull many strands of this together. And the key things, as I keep saying about these papers, is their early identification. And the second most important point is they're a point in time, and for me they're live documents. It's almost like as part of your business planning, your resource, that future longer term resource planning, it will be reviewed on a very regular basis so that we can actually adapt and change based on funding streams might change, our outcomes might change, and how we can forecast that as much as we possibly can. Working really closely with LGA, working closely with local authorities, partners. I've certainly met with people already. And that's probably about all I can say. I mean, what we pay at the moment is we benchmark that, and we will continue to benchmark that, and it's reasonably competitive. It's going to be difficult, and we know that we're going to be challenged, and many other partners are going to be looking for the similar skills at the same time. And and at the end of the day, the employees got the right to be able to go and move and work to where they want to go and move and work. So I think it's about being open. I think it's about sharing. I think it's about a lot of like I said, growing talent. And I think the last thing I want to say is there is a place for contingent labour in this too. We just want to make sure that we're very clear about where we want that contingent labour, and that's why I call this resourcing rather than workforce. Workforce are our people. Contingent labour will be where there's maybe some specific bits that we think actually it's right for some consultants to come and do that piece, but we also want to make sure that where we think that maybe some consultancies are taking that role at the moment, we switch that out and make sure that we maintain and retain the expertise, because it's something that we will need going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Just a supplementary from sort of the other angle of it says in the paper about there not being any risks. And I guess my question is, have we done a risk assessment for if we can't find the correct level of developed staff in terms of both externally, but also if our current workforce aren't up to the next step, now would be the time to be getting them there, if that makes sense.
Very good point, and it was risks specific to that paper. So as a result of my sharing this both internally and externally, this will then form a change programme, really, with a whole series of work streams. So, you know, very typical, won't teach people to suck eggs. This is our current situation, this is where we're heading to, and we will have, I'm pulling together a programme of work with a couple of people in a transit and transformation team who, or every one of those will be a programme. It'll have a risk, it'll have a clear risk register, it'll have a project initiation document, and we'll run it as a programme of change where we track risk, where we track progress, where we try and anticipate as much as we can.
Thank you. Is that something that can come to scrutiny? Thank you.
Yeah, kind of a brief comment first. We do often allude to the fact that we are a public board and members of the public may tune in, although I'm sure a lot of them have got better things to be doing. Just around the use of language, I found someone talked earlier about wicker jargon, and I found there is a lot of that in this, and I was just wondering, obviously it's a very early insight, but as we move on and get more detail, it would be good to move away from some of that, because as I was going through it, I was thinking to members of the public, a lot of this reads as jargon, and that's always a concern for me when members of the public do choose to tune in. My question was about artificial intelligence though, and this briefly got mentioned earlier, and obviously the document doesn't directly reference it much, but it does have a digital blueprint at West Yorkshire, and we do reference data and digital, but we're moving into a world now where some estimates say that roughly 50% of white-collar jobs will be lost to AI within 10, 15 years, and I was just wondering, as we're thinking about resourcing for the future, if that's a theme that's coming out and something that the West Yorkshire Combined Authority is thinking about, because I think a big concern for myself, and particularly in Calderdale, is that I'm concerned that will be exacerbated in areas like Calderdale, that they will feel a need to move into Leeds, Bradford, etc. to find work, but then that work may also go in future as well, so you've got a double impact. So that's what I wanted to ask about.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. A very, very good and current point. So, first of all, on the jargon, thank you, and I'll make sure we read back through that and check that, and maybe get some other independent people to read and give us some feedback. AI, we're about to start this journey along with a lot of our colleagues, and so there is an AI strategy that's been pulled together at the same time. Where we've started with that is we have got a trial that is starting around AI and focused on using Copilot, because we partner with Microsoft are the tools that we use, and there'll be a roadmap that will be pulled together as a result of that trial. It is other combined authorities are going through exactly the same thing at the moment. So we're working with West Mids, we're working with TFGM and Greater Manchester, and sharing learning in terms of how we do that. Now, so without dipping out of the question, I want to see what that advises. My initial thoughts on that at the moment is I think what we will need to pull some risk registers together about how we actually manage that. My early indication would be that it might change the way people do things more than lose things. That's what that's my initial thought. And I think that if there's any risk, it'll maybe be at some entry grade levels that we might have to consider. But I think there's a lot more emphasis needs to be put on it will change the way people do things and maybe create efficiencies, but not necessarily remove the need for people. But that's my initial, that's the initial meetings that I've been involved in terms of AI. We need to wait and see what the 100 licensed pilot review tells us.
Just briefly, it's good that you touched on entry-level jobs because, colleagues I'm aware of, and it's less relevant to the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, that's what's going, particularly in programming is a key area. It's just going. And again, when we're looking at skills and potentially moving 16 to 18, it's that element of we've got a whole generation of young people that is going to move into the most different workforce we've potentially seen since the Industrial Revolution. So it's good that we're thinking about it, and obviously we are at an early stage, so I appreciate that as well.
Well, Councillor Rowntree, then Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Joe. Can I try a very specific question first? I mean, how many staff does the Combined Authority have at the moment? Have you got
1,000.
About 1,000. Yeah. Okay, thanks. I'm looking at your paragraph 5.2 here, where you're talking about redress the balance of contingent workforce versus Combined Authority employment. I'm just thinking of that. I mean, clearly the direction of travel is more directly employed staff, fewer consultants and freelancers. Do you have any points of comparison for this? I mean, sort of thinking of other combined authorities, perhaps the experience of Manchester or local authorities, civil service. Do you have a target in mind as or best practice models, or is it just the direction of travel?
In short, we don't have that at the moment, but that is, I was saying, this is almost like early identification, and the next stage is to then really do a much more greater, deeper dive. Mass transit has been one area for us that our own learning has showed us that we want to maintain a corporate memory. We want to make sure that people who have been involved in some of the early stages of some of the things that we're doing are retained in the organisation. So I think our own learning has shown us that. But understanding, we do work really closely. I work very closely with Manchester and the West Mids in particular, because we're part of a PTF forum as well. From a trade union bargaining perspective, we're together. So we haven't done that piece of work at the moment, but it's definitely something that we can do, and I'll make a note of to make sure it goes as part of the project plan.
Do you want to come back again?
Thank you, Chair. May I ask about digital transformation? It's not supplementary as such, but just a bit further on. Thank you. Yeah, just sort of working down your document, Joe, a mention of digital transformation there. I'm wondering, and I'm guessing, and I suppose hoping that your answer is actually it's a bit of both, but just thinking, is it partly more staff and digital specialists and cross-staff upskilling as well, that as a part of people's job we would expect them to be more digitally enabled than previously?
Yeah, yes, in short, yes. And I would say that that's one of the areas that we highlighted in here as a specific need, because I'm very conscious that that's also very competitive market, probably one of the key areas of growth for us, as well as needing to enhance and grow the talent in the organisation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we've got Councillor Smith, then Councillor Edward.
Thanks. Oh, that's noisy, isn't it? So I'm just want to pick up the point about AI again. I think it's inevitable that we will see masses of change in the next 10 or 15 years, and I think that what we need to do, and I think this is probably almost I suspect sounds a bit blunt, but it's not meant to. I think we've got to see it as an opportunity and not a threat. I don't think there's anything we can do about it. I've got a son who's 16 in a few weeks, and I need to sort of guide him through the world of work and all these opportunities and things that, you know, he may not want to look at because potentially they may not exist. My professional background is in medical imaging, and the masses of change that I've seen in the last 5 years and are coming through as we speak, it's mind-blowing what can be done by AI now. So I think what I'm trying to say is, I believe our role, my role, your role, probably your role rather than our role, if I'm honest, I think the way to tackle this is to know that this is coming, see it as a positive, and yes, there will be people that need support probably through career changes, redirection and that type of thing. But actually, this body probably could look at, you know, refocusing in some areas as opposed to seeing AI as a threat. We've been through lots of change over the last 200 years as a society, as a country, as a world, and it's going to keep on happening. There's nothing we can do to stop technology advancing. The great thing about the human being is our innovative approach to these things, and how, you know, that's why we have AI, because clever people have decided that, you know, that can work. So I think really what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of opportunities in AI, and I'm not for a minute suggesting that we just abandon people in roles or anything like that, but I think that we can see this as an opportunity to just pivot slightly in certain areas, and you know, I've been through loads of change programs in my career, and you know, we haven't mass thrown people out of organisations I've been involved with. They've moved into slightly different roles, and yes, the world of work will look different, but we're not going to be able to change that. So I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. It absolutely does, and I think you're absolutely right. It's a really big learning area for us all, to be honest. And resilience is a really big key part of our strategy going forward as well. Because the more we move into the digital space, the more we've got to learn about how resilient we can be with that too, and the risks that go with that. So we are planning that at the same time and making sure we plan that. I think that you're absolutely right. Seeing it as an opportunity where we possibly can rather than a threat is definitely. And my key thing here is, that's what these two papers were about. It's just trying to think ahead, because the more we can do that, the more we can bring our people with us in terms of being able to share that, and seeing it a bit more as it's just enriching their jobs a bit more. It's about actually enlarging their skills, their capabilities, and then making sure there's enough time to get them through that. And for people who don't want to do that, then that's fine too, and we need to make sure that there's safe space for them to say, it's not for me. All of that will be part of a much more detailed plan in terms of, and the digital development and the future technology strategy is my responsibility, along with resourcing and people, because they just go hand in hand, people, process and systems. So we are looking at it wherever we can. But the organisation has changed significantly in the last few years, and the amount of people in it has doubled, for example, and the challenges that we've got. So now's a really good time to make sure we actually just review all of those things ourselves, and that's what we're doing. I'm sure we'll be sharing different elements of that with the Scrutiny Committee as we develop that.
Do you want a supplementary? No, okay. Right, got Councillor Edwards, then Councillor Merritt.
Yes, thanks, Joe. My question, you sort of answered one part of that already, actually, with the relation to mass transit and how retaining skills was a big priority. Because I think we know, looking at the infrastructure projects in the UK, it's one of the fact that sometimes skill retention isn't kept within the public sector is actually one of the reasons why projects are so expensive. And obviously, if we're planning on rolling out more mass transit, we need that. We need to retain the skills. So I was just wondering, to expand a bit more on that, where this work sits in terms of the wider adult skills work that WICA does, because if you're identifying skills gaps, is that something WICA could start commissioning training on to try and plug some of those? So I know that happens with bus drivers, which is great. But is that going to happen with some of the more technical stuff, which is probably, because like a bus driver could then quite easily go and become a HGV driver, which is well within their rights. But if we're looking at some of the really technical stuff within government and local government, that's less transferable, and that's stuff that we do really desperately need. Skills shortages in specific fields like planning, for example, is quite well known. So I was just wondering where it sits.
It's a very, very good point, and one that's not lost. So our socio-economic strategy in terms of the wider workforce in West Yorkshire and what we promote and encourage other employees to do is something that will also sit alongside this as we develop that. Fair Work Charter, all of those kind of things are things that we'll apply to ourselves as we do this. I think that it's also something that we are very, very conscious of, making sure that we reflect where possible in the work that we're doing, because quite a lot of what we're doing is through a system. It's not the actual doing, if you like, in terms of that still comes through the system. It is going to be about how we learn how to contract that better and how to procure that better and how to. So very conscious of it. I haven't got a plan I could share with you on that right now. But
it wasn't so much the actual where is your plan, it was what you plan on
doing. You know, it's something that we absolutely are very conscious of, and something that I'm very passionate about, making sure that we actually try and that we write into our plans.
WICA commissions people, commissions like, for example, Realise Training, who are based in my ward. They did a lot of work with the trying to plug some of the skills shortage, which is a really important skills shortage on bus drivers. But I'm just thinking also sometimes more in terms of some of the higher skill jobs. So we're not just, I suppose we're opening a wide range of opportunity, and it sort of ties in to the point Councillor Thompson was making in terms of giving young people an option to get a really high skilled job, which is really valuable for them. I'm not necessarily expecting a response on that, but I think that's just really got to be something that we're upping the ambition with what we're doing with training to also ultimately help WICA and local authorities deliver our plans.
Absolutely, and I just keep agreeing with you, but I think what my role here to do is to turn it into something a bit more formal, and we're still at that really, and that again at that early identification stage. But I've been sat with Bradford University and been invited to the Year 3 graduate presentation on the digital at the end of their digital course, to actually look at how can we involve some of our young people in how they might have a career here, and promote how they, we would be a great place for them to come and work, so that we can attract some of those skills and connect it to young people who are in West Yorkshire. So we are doing it, but I want to do it in a bit more of an organised and proactive fashion.
Yes, I just wanted to understand the sort of parallel side of all the internal changes in terms of how we're engaging the existing workforce, you know, staff, reps, trade unions, and so on.
We have, I suppose that's a question more for the staff reps than for me, but I believe we have a really strong relationship with our staff reps, right through to here at the Combined Authority. Nearly everything we obviously track any decisions that we're making and any changes in the organisation and document that, and our documentation on everything we do requests a conversation to be signed off by the trade union before it goes through. So we work and meet with them on a daily stroke at other a very, very, very close relationship with them, and get them to input and have a voice in pretty much everything we do.
I'd just like to touch on the skills basis, if I can, that's been obviously discussed both with Councillor Smith and Councillor Edwards. We have in this country an ageing workforce. That's in our major industries, and I'm looking at construction. I've been in construction all my life, and now our future growth, particularly in this area, particularly in housing, and all the associated areas. In the construction industry, the average age force is between 40 and 60. We are going to have a massive, massive drop-off in the next 10 years of people retiring. There's nobody coming through for that. Is there a strategy there to start to look at the skills gap with our local employers, with the industry within our area, and that's integration with the Combined Authority and the skills and training. Yes, we're doing a lot of skills and training. There is AI coming through. There is going to be a lot of change in the workforce skills, but we still have a lot of basic skills in this country, a lot of basic skills in this area that are not being fulfilled. Because we can't get the skills from the people, we can't bring the apprentices through, we can't bring the workforce through from the young people through, and give them a good career in our major industries. And those major industries are what are actually are putting the finance, the profit into this country. And that's where the growth is starting. This is what this country needs, growth. It wants its industry to grow. So I'd like to know that interrelationship between the Combined Authority, the training, and the link with industry. Thank you.
Do you want me to try and
Sarah, yeah, Sarah, you can.
Because I think that is a major issue that is and a major feature of the local growth plan. And we talked about skills earlier on, but a lot of the work that in Felix's area, our Director of Inclusive Economy Growth and Cultural Skills, is looking at is around, as part of our growth plans, is not just what is the infrastructure that we're building around bus franchises and mass transit, but how are we, and we talked about inclusive growth earlier, how are we making sure that residents and young people and even adults who might need to retrain within the region are able to take up those opportunities. So that is a big piece of work, I think, that it's separate to kind of the work that Joe is working on, but it is interlinked, because we know that some of the big skills, the big industry that's coming forward, potentially for mass transit, will rely on some of those skills coming through the pipeline. So it's hugely important, and it might be something that we could talk about in a lot greater detail as part of that work on the local growth plan. But that is one of the big priorities in the local growth plan, is around how are we making sure we have got a workforce and equipped for the future, essentially, because we do know, as you've said, that in some areas we are behind where we need to be nationally, and we need to do something about that. So some of the skills budget that we talked about earlier is around looking at where those gaps are and how we address those gaps, and we make sure that whilst we're talking about growth areas, we've got a pipeline of talent that could come forward and be able to kind of support our businesses, because what we don't want is businesses to leave because they've not got access to the right level of skills, you know, and ability locally. So that is it's a hugely important part of the local growth plan, that element.
We are finding that in our industry, in our area where industries are moving out to find areas of skills, and that is true in the Radford area. There are companies that are, you know, relocating, and I think there's a lot of basic skills in our basic industries that haven't changed for many years. We have had, you know, we've got computerised machinery, we've got a lot of computerised systems and AI coming in, but there's still that basic need. When you talk about mass transit, there's still the civil engineers needed, there's still the civils people needed, there's still the construction people to put that into place. It's all right doing it strategically, we'll have this mass transport, fantastic, but how many... I visit a site in Leeds, in Hunslet, we've got 450 men on one site, and that's just one construction site. How many people are we going to do, is the civil engineering industry going to need to put this mass transit through? That's what will stop us, that will stop our progress if we cannot put those skills into the basic industries that we need and we call upon to actually enhance our area. And it's a very basic call, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Now, Councillor Rose assures me she's only got a small point to make.
Indeed, Chair, because I just want to support everything that Councillor David Nuns has said. Some years ago, here in Wyca, we had a presentation about career development, and we had two very nice young ladies come along, and one of their major concerns was the difficulty in getting into schools to catch the young people, maybe at 16 years of age, to get them into a trade. I don't see that we've got a robot yet that can be a plasterer or a plumber, but it might come around, David. I have no doubt about it. You have indeed, love. You have indeed. And I totally support that concept of the manual, the value of a manual workforce and the experience that they've got. But coming back to your report, two things. I'm really pleased to see that, and you've expressed it in terms of talent pipelines. But Joe, you mentioned universities. I think you need to be getting into schools earlier to capture the 16-year-olds and maybe some of those that are in need, to get them into a skill that might give them a trade for the future. So I hope that's part of it as well. And in the report here, Chair, on the Transport Directorate, and it comes down to issues, workforce planning. Well, workforce planning is something that goes on all the time, I'm hoping. But in this particular one, examples is given of contract management. That's procurement. Revenue modelling and customer relations management. I would have thought already that we have the basis of that happening within Wyca, that you just need to upskill into that from existing staff, or indeed find out why that's not as forward thinking as we would want you to do. But on the rest of the report, I think you've identified really what's needed for the future of the specialist skills. So thank you for that, Joe.
Thank you. That's really lovely feedback. Thank you. And those particular roles that you meant, it's around expansion of and specialism in mass transit or in transport. And and you're right. Some of that will be about development, and some of it will be about bringing in new people at the same time as many other people are trying to find them too. So we do need to really focus and work very closely with Felix in terms of how we actually source that from our region.
As all meetings should go, me getting the last word, Chair. Thank you. I just wanted to come in on the school point. I am a teacher, or I was until relatively recently, and actually even 16 is too late. But the real issue isn't that people don't want to be in trades, it's that previous governments have not valued trades, and therefore schools weren't able to get the same number of points in order to be classed as good schools from vocational stuff as they were from academic. And therefore, until we change that nationally, we won't get people doing the vocational courses which we need, because schools need bums on seats to get money in order to pay for the education for everyone. So it's kind of one of those circles, isn't it? And it's whether or not there's anything we can do to lobby around that as a combined authority now that this has kind of been highlighted for us.
The mayor can use her soft power. She can go down and raise that very issue. So I think if we note that one. So, do you want to say something final, Joe?
Thank you. That's the first time I've been to Scrutiny Committee, so thank you. It's lovely to meet you all. I think it's a really fair point, and something that I'm sure Khaled will make a note of. I wish I could change that myself, but that's not going to be something that's quite within my gift. But thank you.
We've raised a number of issues today, and we'll be progressing them through various work groups that we've got. But as Joe said, this was an initial report which we felt was important to bring just now, because there's a lot of comment. We've been talking about planning, and planning in particular, there is a fear in local government that we're going to lose our best planners to the combined authority, because that was basically what happened in reverse when we had the regional spatial strategy. A lot of these people came back into local government, and some of them left to go into it. So we have been there before in local government. So that's not look. WICA have got to do what's best for WICA, but there is a fear in local government that we will lose some of our better people because the package might be more attractive to them because you're less constrained. And that's the fear. And I don't think anybody's against people getting better for themselves, but that's what our fear. We're sitting here with our councillor hats on, thinking, we might lose some of our best people, and that's a concern. But that's not something that you've got any responsibility for. You've got to drive the best things forward. So that said, thank you both for coming along here today. You've given us a good food for thought. Khaled will be getting back in touch to get follow-up so that we can get, whether it's a in-person meeting like this, or whether we just ask you to send us through a brief update. Because I don't think yesterday at the Combined Authority you were given any dates to come back with anything more formal and follow up to it. So we might put some of those in for you. Because there was nothing put in from the Combined Authority yesterday as to when you needed to come back. But I do think it's vitally important that we get regular updates and keep a watching eye on what's going to happen. So thank you very much. So the final item on the agenda is our agenda for the next meeting, and we've agreed that we will invite the Mayor to come along, and we've got a number of specialist questions that we're going to ask her. If anybody's got anything further that they would like to add to that list, but transport being the main one in terms of moving things forward. Was there anything else that we picked up as a major item for the Mayor to answer? The Mayor's response to the... She responded to us. We're now going to respond to her in terms of the responses she sent. We've got a bit of ping pong going back and forth. Councillor Merritt.
I just wondered whether, given the earlier discussion, we should also pick up on the social cohesion issues.
Yeah, as to what you can do about it. Yeah?
I might mention what in the premium.
Yeah.
So, this was in relation to the Mayor's response. I think one of the points that we discussed earlier on in the pre-meeting was her response to question 2. It was something I brought up at the meeting when she came at the May meeting. There's an inconsistency with her engagement with councillors across West Yorkshire. So in Leeds, we talked about how there's a 1-hour question time, where all members are equally as entitled to put forward questions, and that my understanding is that at least all other local authorities have a similar kind of setup. The outlier being Bradford, and when she was challenged on that, she said she comes to the executive and she goes to Labour group. So what that told me is residents in Tong have less representation with the mayor than as a non-Labour councillor than a councillor in any other one of the constituent areas, and I don't think that's good enough. So I think the mayor needs to really expand on number 2 and what she's going to do differently to ensure Bradford residents get equal opportunity to be able to have their representatives ask questions on their behalf.
Yeah. Sarah, can you ensure that that's fed back when you talk to Ben and to the mayor? So thank you very much. Thanks for your Merit. Yes.
Sorry, the work plan on the agenda. Can I request that next time we see the work plan, we have a plan that is a forward plan and not actually a backward plan, as most of most of that document is.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.